I want to congratulate you. You were fired by the head of the free world.
Right.
Most people get fired by the
Right.
guy who works at McDonald's,
Right.
But in your case, it was by the president.
Right,
of
I've
the
never
United
been
States.
fired before. So
Never
I went all the way
before,
to the
not
top.
even in a
Yeah.
summer job.
Well, people
or
have hinted at me that maybe it's time to move on, but this was an outright firing.
Yeah.
He made it pretty clear.
We caught up in a parking lot a few weeks ago, and I said we'd gotten the news report out of D.C. that a whole bunch of U.S. attorneys around the country that had been appointed by President Obama were being dismissed on that Friday, and
Right.
I'd hit your press person and said, "Is Peter one of them?" And got no response. That was around noon, 1 o'clock, and you mentioned that you found out a little later in the day.
Yeah, I did. I was having a coffee. It was a day off for school for my son, so I had stayed home with him, and I got a call from Jim, my former press guy. I said, "Hey, have you heard from DC today?" And I had not at that point. But yeah, it's all good. My sons and I and my wife packed things up. I was ready to go. I brought a lot of things home already. So, we made a family event out of it and packed up, went to dinner, and it's off to new things now.
Great. You had a long tenure as U.S. Attorney.
I did.
8 years?
Nearly 8, about 7.5.
And had some significant cases. From a financial standpoint, obviously the Google case might have been one of the biggest.
Yeah, the Google case was one of the 5 largest forfeiture cases in the history of the United States at the time, $500 million. Yeah, big case. Less. In my mind, always less about the money and more about the conduct we were trying to change, which was Google working with these sort of offshore pharmacies to lead people trying to buy drugs online, opioids online, and really getting that to stop. And of course, that was in 2010, 2011, well before we hit this opioid tsunami. And looking back on it, those were the tea leaves. If we could have been reading them, we would have. People going online trying to buy these things they can't get from their own physicians. You could really see the beginning of the addiction problem we have now.
And that's an issue that you really took on and championed, trying to find some solutions to really an epidemic. I mean, hundreds of Rhode Islanders have been dying annually.
Yeah,
on this issue.
It is. We have in the last few years over 300 people overdosing and dying. Not just overdosing and surviving, overdosing and dying. And so, how many people do we lose? To car crashes each year. John LaCrosse, the chief in Barrington, at a recent town hall that I moderated, said no more than 60. There were fewer homicides we have every year. If we were having 300 homicides, the world would be on fire here. I really felt like it's been important to raise awareness about the issue, to get people talking about ways to avoid addiction in the first place, clean out your medicine cabinets, reach kids in school, run away. I said to kids the other day, if someone wants to hand you a pill who's not a doctor or your parent, run in the other direction. Really serious
Is
stuff.
healthcare a problem, though? I mean, I had ACL surgery 10 years ago. They could not try and give you more painkillers. And now I think they've changed some of the policies in the past few years. But even still today, you hear about these stories about, young men and women, a lot of them, athlete, injury-driven, and getting prescriptions to very, very powerful and very addictive drugs.
Well, there's been some good movement over the years. You're right in the sense that, before this past year here, before this past year in Massachusetts, your kid could go in and have their wisdom teeth taken out and given, 30 Vicodins, an opioid, it's a powerful opioid. My kids had their wisdom teeth out. Fortunately, didn't need to take them, but they're there if they'd wanted to take them. And then, unfortunately, sometimes they stick around your medicine cabinet for a while. There are now dosage limits in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island, which is good. Doctors are being educated about responsible prescribing. I mean, they never overprescribe deliberately. It's, it really probably came from a lack of awareness about the scope of the problem. So we're trending in the right direction. But the fact of the matter is, I say this a lot, our medicine cabinets are killing our kids, our neighbors, our friends. You got to get those cleaned out. Better prescribing practices are important. The other thing is, when we talk about healthcare, is we've got to get medically assisted treatment covered by insurance. There's no way to beat this problem once you're addicted without that kind of help. It's expensive and it's not accessible to a lot of people.
Shifting gears a little bit in the more traditional role as U.S. Attorney, you oversaw some high-profile public corruption cases, and I think every time anybody faces any kind of charges indictments or incarceration. There's a reflection in Rhode Island that we are the most corrupt state in the union. And when you go and look at the national data that's pulled together, usually statistically we're not.
Right.
First of all, we don't have county government, and not being from a state that has county government, it looks to be, when we always look and analyze these numbers, that those counties are the most corrupt kind of things going.
Maybe we're lucky in that regard. Right?
Absolutely.
One other layer of government we don't have to worry about because it doesn't exist.
And it's kind of the one in between that nobody pays attention to, right? So, but what? First, talk about some of the cases and what the lessons you learned from those. Do you see trends? Do you see any kind of similarities between some of these cases that say, should we go to a full-time legislature? Should we, whatever it might be?
Yeah, I guess there are a few things. I mean, the first comment is there's a lot of public officials that are doing good work and doing the people's work. So that's the majority of folks. Then there are the ones who we prosecute over the years: the Mayor Moreau's, the Speaker Fox's, the Ray Gallison's, the House Finance Chair, the 3 town councilmen in North Providence, Senator Maselli, Deputy Speaker McCauley. If I see a common theme in there are 2 things. Number one, the amount of, in terms of where there were bribes paid, we're not talking about high dollar amounts, and even where they were more white collar offenses, we're not talking about big dollar amounts. And what always struck me about most of those defendants were they were not real economic successes in their private life, and maybe that drove some of the criminal behavior. So you live in a certain lifestyle, you want to live a certain lifestyle. Fox is a good example of that. You're Speaker of the House. You're supposed to have a certain, probably a cachet. Your law practices and providing that to you. So you try to get that economic lift by committing crime, by taking a bribe or stealing from your campaign account or living off your campaign account. So I see those themes in there. So what do we do to try to take that on? I think this is changing. There was always this sort of, when I got my start as a prosecutor over 20 years ago in the Attorney General's office, and afterwards, there was always a sense that people involved in corrupt activity, Buddy Cianci is a good example, had this sort of rascal feel about them that people, in a sense, sort of admired in a way. I think that is changing. So that's one good thing, right? That the public looks at some of these officials and doesn't have this reaction, the kind of the well-meaning scoundrel.
Yeah, right.
So public perception is changing. We as prosecutors, now a former prosecutor, prosecutors have to be, and people who lead those offices, have to really make that a priority. That has to be a priority, and you have to be willing to make a tough decision. You have to be willing to go into the State House if you need to Speaker Fox's office, for example, execute a search warrant there.
Yeah.
You can't be afraid to kind of take those necessary investigative steps. And then the public really has to work with law enforcement. When you see, if you're being shaken down, you got to come forward. My sense, again, having done these cases both as a state and federal prosecutor on the line and as U.S. attorney, is many people, when they're being shaken down, this takes me back to the Oster case I did as a state prosecutor. It was two developers that were really being approached and shaken down that came forward and helped us make that case. My sense is that may be happening elsewhere, and people are afraid to come forward. People really need to come forward to government and law enforcement, and let us know what's going on. Let them know what's going on, so that we can build these cases.
So one of the things I think about, and we think about from an editorial standpoint, is the idea of a full-time legislature. Because if there was a pattern, here's a group of people who are getting paid in the teens for functionally doing almost full-time work. I mean, I was on the city council of Providence. It was a full-time job, and so not only may you not potentially be successful in what you do during the day, but it's also taking away tons of time. So is that something you've thought about at all? Is that a potential solution to minimize it?
Well, I've heard that argument before, and it makes some sense at some level. I looked at Massachusetts, though, which I think is a full-time legislature.
Yeah,
I think, and they have had plenty of problems, right?
Oh, yeah, they had 3 speakers in
a row, right? And so I don't know that it's the perfect solution, because if you're making, what are you going to pay a legislator? $80,000? Well, there's always more, right? There's always more. So I don't know that that's a perfect solution. The truth is, it sounds corny. We've got to pick good people. It's not always obvious who the good people are, but there are some tells, right? There are some tells. If people are consistently being fined by the Ethics Commission or maybe those are not the people you should return when they have their next turn at the ballot box. Again, when I sit back and kind of look over the landscape, every election year there are some head scratchers, I suppose. Yeah. And unfortunately, sometimes those head scratchers, end up in the in the laps of law enforcement, and we've got to do something about it.
38 Studios obviously has been one of the plagues on Rhode Island's. I think to some degree on our sense of community and our ability to move forward on economic development. It is just. And it's gone on now for 5 years since the collapse of the company. The governor came out a few months ago off some questioning by Kate Nagel and said, the governor said Peter Kilmartin should not have been involved in the case. He had been in the leadership with Gordon Fox a few months earlier and had voted in favor of it. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is that...
38 Studios is a psychological millstone around the necks of Rhode Island and Rhode Island. There's no question about that. I think that, that's a question that can only be answered, I suppose, by Peter Kilmartin. Let me say this, though, that I've always believed, certainly as the U.S. Attorney, you have to be concerned not only about a conflict, but about the appearance of a conflict. At the same time, you've got to decide, what's the impact on my office if I can't handle this case? Who's going to take it over? Who's going to manage it? There are some decisions that the U.S. Attorney or the Attorney General, at the end of the day, has to make. It used to happen fairly frequently that, I can think of Fox being one of those cases at certain points in the investigation. Well, you got a fork in the road, whether it's how you're going to proceed in the investigation, what you're going to charge with, who else you're going to charge. And not everyone agrees sitting around the table, and someone's got to make the decision. And in that instance, that's what the U.S. Attorney gets paid to do. That's what the Attorney General gets paid to do. So when you recuse yourself, there's a cost to the office when you do that. So Did
you ever have a situation, either as a state prosecutor or as a U.S. Attorney for Rhode Island, in which you stepped aside?
I did. I did. Sure, I did. Yeah, and for example, my sister-in-law, now former sister-in-law, worked for Blue Cross, and so I was recused from any case in which Blue Cross was involved, whether as a potential victim or as a potential defendant. That it was necessary to do that. I did that.
Was this as U.S. Attorney?
This was as U.S. Attorney, but that definitely had a cost on the office because there were some fairly significant healthcare fraud cases that I was recused from. And my first assistant was making those decisions, and he had two. They were both very capable, but I think the office loses something when there is a recusal. So there are times when it needs to be done, not only because there is a conflict, but because there's an appearance of a conflict. Yeah. The public's got look. I had no issue with Blue Cross. I would not have changed anything, but we wanted the public to have confidence that I wasn't doing anything pro or con to Blue Cross because of my now former sister-in-law. I think it's really important to think about those things really, really carefully.
You're a civilian?
I am, yes. And, notwithstanding the suit, yes.
You still look like that.
I know. I had some meetings today. I had to wear the suit.
You've joined the FBI.
I know. I'm not wearing the lapel pin anymore.
Yeah, that's right. And law firms are calling and chirping at you to come join them, and there's rumors rampant about what your next steps are, and you, of course, are going to announce all your future plans here and Go Local, where your son's going to college next year, all those types of things, what you're going to invest in. What's your short-term plans? What's your long-term plans?
Well, I have a great offer from Jamestown Hardware to come and kind of work back there. Those guys are great. I love those guys, Scott and Steve. And so that's high on my list right now.
Be careful. Be careful. We don't want to see you fired from 2 jobs in short order.
I know, but those guys will be good to me. I don't know what I'm going to do, yet. I love public service. I've spent the last 21 years in a prosecutor's office, the Attorney General's office on the line, the U.S. Attorney's office on the line, and having led the U.S. Attorney's office. And I love that, not just being a prosecutor, but doing the people's work. I don't think I ever felt more proud as a lawyer. I was in private practice in Boston representing some fairly large institutional clients at Goodwin Procter. And there was just something different about getting up and saying, that I represent the people of the United States, or I represent the people of the state of Rhode Island. I love that.
And you didn't have to do timesheets the same way.
Yeah, we didn't have 6-minute increments, right? Those green sheets at the time, 6 minutes. Every 6 minutes accounted for.
Thank God we got you now before you take one of those jobs, so we didn't get billed.
Exactly, right, exactly. Every minute counts. But I love that. I love doing that. And so I would like to stay in public service some way. I don't know what form that will take yet. You know, I'm giving that a lot of thought. I've been actually, busier than frankly I expected the last couple of weeks. But as the next few weeks, go forward, I hope to give that some more thought.
We'll be very interested in what those thoughts will be. It's a very interesting time. It's a very dynamic time. Previously I was in government years ago. I don't think I've ever seen such a period of time which so many people are engaged in politics and government at a level of passion that is. I keep thinking, well, it's got to die down.
Right.
The community can't absorb this level
of,
but it keeps going and going and going.
No, I think that's right. I think this administration, frankly, has been polarizing.
Yeah.
And so people are responding and reacting. I mean, people ask me about the Attorney General's office and why do I love that office so much and why do I think it's so important? Well, I think there are at least two good examples of it. It's not just the heartland of criminal prosecutions that office does, and that attorneys general across the country do, and state prosecutors do, and county prosecutors. It's things like civil rights. The Civil Rights Division under President Bush was really not very robust. Under President Obama, it became very robust. My sense is that it will not be as robust under President Trump. So there will be a place for state attorneys general to step in and do good, solid, necessary civil rights work. The environment's another perfect example. If we're going to have an EPA,
we may not have
that doesn't care about wind power, doesn't care about fossil fuels, then state attorneys general are going to need to step up and be a voice for those causes. And so I think whether it's attorneys generals or it's the regular person, and my wife is incredibly energized. I mean, watching the national news now for us is now appointment television. We watch it together every night. We weren't doing that 6 months ago. We're doing it now because we're both concerned, frankly. I mean, we like many people, we have children and we wonder what the world will look like for them for 8, 12, 20 years going forward now.
I want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, John.